Hello, and thank you for having me. Thank you all for being here for my talk titled Femmes Gone Fatale, Commodified Women at the Frontier in 21st Century American Horror Cinema. Below is the link to the article I am basing my talk in. And what a way to spend the 4th of July for me as an American Studies scholar. As we shall see, my talk revolves around women who pursue liberty through monstrosity, a theme that connects ambiguously to today's celebrations of the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. I will begin by breaking down the key words of my title and then connect them to Gothic tropes into exemplary filmic productions. Since its inception in national mythology, the frontier in the American imagination separates the opposites, constituting the Western trope of feminized savagery versus the virtues of male aggressiveness and competition. This mythology builds on the thesis of renowned historian Frederick Jackson Turner, who identified an us versus them spirit that is culturally foundational since the advent of the European expansion into occupied North American spaces. He first presented his essay, The Significance of the Frontier in American History, at the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893. I argue that the feminization of violence on the frontier has the potential to challenge and revitalize this dichotomy. Amy Kaplan, for example, charts that America's international conflicts tend to be imagined as the military business of men, unlike the domestic concerns of the nation, which are associated with spaces of feminine interest. Such an interpretation matches Edward Said's reading of 19th century French scholarly portrayals of the Middle East as a feminized space that is receptive to Western implementations of administrative, scientific, economic, and moral standards, because it is imagined as lacking the same kind of discursive authority seen in the West. The implication of Kaplan's and Said's discussions of the rhetoric of Western imperial endeavors is that it becomes constructed as the interest of the othered peoples and those awaiting the redemptive arrival of Western men to remain docile and receptive to the latter's civilizing strategies. The most commodified subject under gendered Western occupation, however, the zombie, resists being contextualized within a simplistic narrative of conquest. Kieran Murphy traces the beginning of the Haitian zombie to the system of plantation slavery in the colonial era, which was resisted through voodoo dancing rituals of African religious origin that were outlawed due to their subversive potential. Consequently, the passive corporality of the zombie continues to embody enforced historical amnesia in the Caribbean context. At the same time, the figure of the easily disposable zombie has become associated with the dehumanizing effects of industrialization and mass consumerism since its appropriation by Hollywood cinema. Analogously, the significance of vampirism has shifted towards tragic social isolation since the 1970s. In addition, excessive violence rather than blood sacrifices have come to constitute their sustenance since the 1990s, parallel to the decreasing significance of the sacred in Western societies. While both zombies and vampires thus reflect the state of their contemporary societies, David Castillo attributes a socio-critical function to monstrosity in general, and draws on the etymological relation of the word monster to the Latin words, I quote, monstrare, to show, and monere, to warn, end quote. Yet, while historical interspecies creatures indeed visualized the result of transgressing the laws of nature, Castillo poses the question why vampires and zombies are the most popular monsters in the current moment, especially in light of the unappealing carnal abstinence and captive passivity of the original Afro-Caribbean zombies. At this point, it is helpful to mention James Ward's reflection on the commercial failures of erotic zombie films, such as Zombie Strippers. In Ward's interpretation, hunger-driven zombies are incapable of strategic seduction and rather remind global audiences of the terrorist subjects who were stripped of their humanity when they were brutally tortured in the prisons of Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay. In this cultural context, he argues, any sexual attraction of viewers to the dirty, rotting bodies of zombies would be either inconceivable or testify to a deranged state of mind. In contrast to Ward's focus on the aesthetic quality of zombified strippers, I prioritize how they, along with vampiric showgirls, actively deploy their hypersexualized bodies in order to enact revenge upon the same patriarchal structures that objectified them in the first place. The cultural texts these figures appear in could further be seen to subversively deploy the highly popular Gothic mode to critique US mainstream society through a post-colonial feminist lens. As examples, I will analyze how the film Zombie Strippers from 2008 and the first season of the series From Dusk Till Dawn from 2014 deploy the Gothic mode, specifically the tropes of zombieism and vampirism, to explore how the figure of the monstrous female challenges those American cultural values that are rooted in foundational patriarchal and frontier fantasies that denigrate others. In response, the monstrous commodified females here presented are shown to transgress the typical notion of otherness that is foundational to and developed throughout the horror genre in film and TV. Zombie Strippers is Jay Lee's film loosely based on Eugene Ionesco's absurdist play Rhinoceros from 1959, with a slight difference as the transformed characters pose an active threat to their environment. The more recent exploration of the trope of monstrous transformation targets the American counterterrorist containment of social issues. Unlike Ionesco, whose Beasts condensed his critique of fascism and consumerism, particularly its aspects of public conformism on individual levels. In Zombie Strippers, a zombie virus is unleashed by the authorities on an unsuspecting population, and in the fictional town of Sartre, Nebraska, the contagion reaches the underground strip club Rhinos, whose dancers contract the virus, and in turn, begin to kill without mercy until a military force must step in to contain the situation. In its introduction, The film Zombie Strippers parodies war on terror rhetoric with its overt sanctification of American global dominance. Its official website introduces the viewer to a world in which George W. Bush remains president, and the nation is embroiled in so many wars that Dr. Shushfeld's secret laboratory in Sartre, Nebraska, must create a virus to reanimate fallen Marines so that they can be redeployed. Here, Gothic fantasy allows the film to voice criticism of war and terror culture, which tends to contain social disputes by centering depictions of combat zones on the subjectivity of American soldiers. Zombie Strippers ascribes a particular relevance to the zombie condition in the context of gender politics, as Dr. Genet announces that the chemovirus, I quote, stays more pure from woman to woman, end quote. She also describes the chemovirus's effects as creating an, I quote, fearless, uninhibited, take no prisoners soldier with a raw survival instinct, end quote. Words later echoed by the stripper Kat, played by adult film actress Jenna Jameson in her professional advice to a new colleague. Drawing influence from Ionesco's absurdist stage play, the virus's effect of subjugating infected strippers to monstrous drives only partially helps them transgress commodification, and unveils the limits of Jean-Paul Sartre's, their town's namesake, paradigmatic existentialist assumption of individual autonomy. Accordingly, once Kat is bitten by a zombified marine, she begins to dance even outside the opening hours of Rhinos to keep attracting customers to devour. Yet, a subversive symbolism lies in the scene where the stripper Lilith rips open the jaw of a customer to devour his tongue. This gesture is informed by the same frustration anxiety that underlies Western fantasies of vampirism, since it permanently foregrounds the source of their monstrous danger and sexualized appeal, their mouths, which are invested with the power of non-heterosexual reproduction and the potential to overthrow the patriarchal status quo. In one particular scene of Zombie Strippers, Lilith is described by the bouncer and Ionesco as, I quote, the dark queen of the underworld, end quote, due to her emo punk style. Lilith others the zombies herself when she describes her experience of this condition, I quote, it's like the snow and stars. I remember once lying in the snow under a clear blanket of stars, and there were so many stars. I couldn't comprehend what it was like, that vast and noble void. But now I understand it. I feel I'm a part of it. That infinite nothingness, end quote. Here, she identifies with the environment in a manner associable to the Native American cultures that resisted absorption by the dominant individualism of the frontier's pioneers, with reference to Turner's depiction. By staging the act of human bodies devouring fellow human bodies, which represents ultimate possessiveness, the film automatically sets the monstrous female against multiple backdrops of nationally relevant exploitation. Toward the end of Zombie Strippers, the Z Squad, enlisted to save Sartre from the zombies, abandon their mission after Dr. Shushfeld confesses his conspiracy with the transformed Ionesco to disseminate the zombie virus as a means of securing social cohesion amid political instabilities. Therefore, Both these men betrayed their national origins in the frontier culture that signified conquering the wilderness of the North American continent with the tools of its own other inhabitants, rather than exploiting them as if they were beasts, although this is how the transformed individuals self-represent in UNESCO's original rhinoceros. By continuing repression beyond the point of the zombie's humanity, Dr. Schuschfeld and Ionesco facilitate the ultimate triumph of the zombie condition, which ironically signifies a possibility for the strippers to resist sexism and challenge the patriarchy that had so obviously contributed to their othered state of being in the first place. Meanwhile, From Dusk Till Dawn envisages the Mexican borderlands as the battlegrounds of communal identity from which the commodified woman launches her attack on the status quo. Unlike the 1996 film by Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez of the same title, the series allows for a larger contextualization of the erotic dancer Santanico's monstrosity as the consequence of an ancient Mayan curse. Played by Isa Gonzalez, Santanico embodies an authority to the dances she presides over that revises the functions of demigoddess or succubus ascribed to her by the so-called Nine Lords of the Night. When she first appears to Richie Gecko as a vision on a refrigerator door, whispering that she wants to drink him, she debases him in an allusion to her vampirism that shifts his self-image from subject to object of corporeal desire. Through her seduction, Richie transforms into her slave, who, in an absurd logic, desires catering to her for eternity, because rather than the other way around, he has been conquered by her, an other of the frontier. Once he finds her, Santanico sacrifices her reign in a ceremony, during which her new prince Richie lets the serpent containing her human blood from her transformation return it into her again, causing her temple walls to shake and the intruding sunbeams to burn her girls, who want to, I quote, return to the earth, end quote. Santanico signifies the repressed, arising for vengeance, as an immortal Native American demigoddess who actively resisted being absorbed by the Spanish colonizers' Christian mythology, when her temple was discovered by the missionary Carlos Madrigal, and she transformed him in exchange for its treasures. Although he removed her from the chains of the lords, Carlos' worship of Santanico in effigy at a candlelit shrine mirrors the patriarchal fantasy of her captors when they cursed her, so that she would eternally receive the human sacrifices she previously rejected for moral reasons. In From Dusk Till Dawn, Santanico renounces mortal humanity for a spiritual dimension. I quote, "You'll be more than you ever were, beyond fire and water, beyond light and dark, beyond dusk and dawn." End quote. After reclaiming the words dusk and dawn from their place in the slogan of the Titty Twister where she dances, open from dusk till dawn, her advertisement of her own Culebra identity resists her role as a commodified weapon of seduction for the Nine Lords. Santanico further transgresses her past worshippers' static conceptions of mythical mothers by assuming her role as, I quote, mistress of the macabre, end quote, as announced by Carlos, to seduce Richie. But she cannot overcome her servitude to male allies without relying on the same mystical powers these had assigned to her when they contained her. Despite being the mother of Culebras, Santanico therefore frames her own scheme to reclaim independence as an equalizing social revolution for all culebras in the following monologue. I quote, "Is this really where we belong? It's true. We put on a good show, and we have a hell of a time too. But is this really what we deserve? To crawl at the feet of our masters? We are so much more than slaves. We're brothers and sisters. We share the same struggle. And the truth is, they are weak, and we're strong. Showtime." End quote. While bathing in blood and styling herself for her show with Carlos' assistance, she is first heard delivering this rallying speech off-screen and then repeats it during their banquet for their superiors, who refuse to resist the Culebra hierarchy. Despite her rejection of leadership, season 1 ends with a threatening image for America, when Santanico and Richie, in a shaded Porsche, follow a sign pointing them back to the border, and her gloved hand clasps his to aesthetically refer to her past as a commodified seductress, whose monstrosity helped her escape direct patriarchal containment. Far from yielding themselves merely to demonization or objectification, the monstrous females of these narratives, including the zombie stripper Cat and the pole-dancing vampire queen Santanico, perform their gender in complex ways, at the intersection of gothic horror and masculine fantasies of violent brutality and female commodification. These dichotomous identities are characterized as the following along a horrific frontier: the acceptable and the othered, civilized and monstrous, and importantly, masculine and feminine. Instead of warning against the inbuilt threats to their society through their allegorical monstrosity, the female monster's nihilism with regard to their terrifying bodies represents a posture of resistance against the foundational American ideology. In the American cultural context, the association of liberal expressions of sensuality with demonic evil stems from the nation's colonial past, rife with Puritan women who claimed to have been held captive by Native American nations and recounted their experiences as tests to their faith, which, according to Richard Slotkin, helped to frame the Puritans' expansion into the New World as a divinely ordained redemptive mission. Like the British lawmakers that Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak indicts for criminalizing the Hindu ritual of widow self-immolation under the guise of protecting colonized women, Ian Esco and Carlos, figures of patriarchal oppression, legitimize the transgressive, even though monstrous, identities of their captive females within their capitalist enterprises. In Spivak's argument, the consequence for such subaltern women who are predestined for discursive disenfranchisement due to the interplay of their gender, race, and class within colonial hierarchies is that corporeal self-destruction all the more comes to signify an undisputable assertion of individual freedom of choice to them. In the horror narratives discussed in this talk, the convergence of the feminine and the monstrous in the female characters further underwrites the way that patriarchal societies objectify others to shield their owners against the threat of self-effacement, which these subaltern women emanate as a form of resistance from within the roles that contain them. Laura Mulvey also attributes a sadistic force to the moment when narrative films, direct the male gaze upon a sexualized female evading identification on the grounds of agenda, and therefore incite the impulse to root for the relatable male hero to either possess or defeat her. Consequently, the zombie and culebra dancers' willful deployment of their erotic appeal and defilement of their male victims signifies a Gothic transgression of iconocentrism and of its patriarchal logic, inverting the gendered repression and commodification they typically experience. Female conversions to brutality here sanction the frontier hero's preemptive violence as compatible with femininely connoted pacifist values, while showcasing moral flexibility, which, interestingly, Turner praises in the American pioneers, as these worked, I quote, for good and evil, end quote, before resisting subjugation at the hands of their environment. A reason why the female monster's uprising against patriarchal oppression is still relevant, although it results in no viable alternative system of communal organization, is implied in Santanico's rebuttal of Seth's skepticism over why he should help a monster escape the Nine Lords. She observes that this professional bank robber does not love the money, but the very act of stealing it as a personal score. Like the flesh-eating and blood-drinking dances, she notes that, as a criminal bank robber, he is not addicted to the money, but to the sense of power it gives him. Thus he, like the rebellious, monstrous females, repeats an existential logic for bestowing meaning to human existences beyond metaphysical contexts. And he represents a perversion of Turner's idealization of the American pioneer spirit that sought to always push the frontier further west. To conclude, I have shown that on the grounds of this ontological otherness of zombies and culebras, and despite certain details constituting their deviance, cultural productions like Zombie Strippers and From Dusk Till Dawn legitimize fantasies of the destruction of transgressive identities, which are codified as feminine, inferior, and demanding a violent militarized intervention to personify the enduring legacy of colonial ideologies for American audiences. Here is my works cited section. And thanks for listening, and please feel free to reach out via Sam.